Picture this: you're walking through a museum at twilight. The halls are vast and eerily quiet, filled with glass cases containing things that once lived but now exist only as displays. But these aren't fossils or ancient artifacts. These are human minds preserved in their last moments of genuine wonder. In one case, you see a child's curiosity crystallized at the exact second before they learned to stop asking why and started accepting because. Every day, we risk joining this collection of consciousness that once burned bright and then went out. In another, the trembling excitement of a teenager discovering they could think thoughts no one had ever thought before. And there, in the corner, nearly forgotten, sits the mind of an adult who once spent entire afternoons simply watching clouds change shape, finding in their movement a meditation deeper than any prayer. The placard reads, "Extinct. Last seen in the early 21st century." But here's what haunts me about this imaginary museum. We're not just visitors, we're potential exhibits. I've spent years studying this phenomenon, watching as brilliant minds slowly dimmed, not through illness or age, but through a kind of spiritual suffocation. A newborn doesn't think about breathing, they simply do it. But a slow submersion in the overflow of a world that has forgotten the difference between information and wisdom. Their mind is like a clear mountain lake, reflecting the world without distortion, mirroring truth without judgment. Every morning, she would stand at that window with her coffee, watching the birds, noticing which flowers were blooming, observing the subtle changes that marked the passage of seasons. She wasn't consuming content about nature, she was in conversation with it. We've traded the deep, slow rhythm of authentic awareness for the frantic pulse of perpetual stimulation. I've seen poets become headline readers, philosophers become opinion repeaters, dreamers become consumers. They call it learned helplessness, the condition where an organism becomes so accustomed to limitation that it continues to limit itself even when the constraints are removed, and said, "I'm not thinking about anything, I'm just being with what's here." And the most terrifying part? Most of them never even noticed the transition. They went to sleep gradually, like a frog in slowly boiling water, never recognizing the moment when their authentic self slipped away and was replaced by something else entirely. I had trained myself to fear the very silence that once nourished my deepest insights. We've forgotten that thoughts can travel distances greater than the space between our ears and our screens. He was hungry for more content, more stimulation, more validation. He would consume information like a starving person at a buffet, never stopping to taste any of it. Act I, the great drowning. One day, someone moved it to a vast aquarium. When I asked what had changed in his understanding of the world, he looked confused. He had confused consuming with digesting, accumulating with understanding. He had developed what I call the appetite that ate itself, a hunger so constant it devoured its own satisfaction. But the fish kept swimming in the same tiny circle, never venturing beyond the invisible boundaries of its former prison. Without these pauses, we get noise instead of symphony, reaction instead of response, information instead of wisdom. We know the intimate details of celebrities' lives, but can't name our own deepest fears. They're consuming experiences at a rate that makes genuine experience impossible. They're living at the speed of thought, but starving at the speed of understanding. He wasn't hungry for information, he was hungry for meaning. They don't lurk in dark alleys or hide behind sunglasses. They wear suits and give TED Talks. They have corner offices in Silicon Valley and vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard. They've created the most addictive substance ever discovered, and they're giving it away for free. He wasn't hungry for content, he was hungry for connection. He wasn't hungry for more, he was hungry for depth. We can recite the latest political scandals, but can't remember the last time we felt genuine gratitude. It requires the patience to let experiences settle, to allow impressions to marinate in the quiet spaces of consciousness until they transform into insight. And patience in our world has become a luxury few can afford. We're swimming in circles in an ocean, convinced we're trapped in a space no bigger than a puddle. The ocean of noise, not to make calls or send messages, but just to check to see if something had happened in the few minutes since I last looked. Thoughts can travel at the speed of light, instant reactions, immediate judgments, reflexive responses. But understanding moves at the speed of wisdom, which is much slower. By evening, I had counted over 200 unconscious reaches, 200 moments when my mind, feeling the discomfort of its own company, sought escape into the digital noise. I want you to imagine consciousness as breath, pure, essential, automatic when we're born. Now imagine that lake slowly filling with debris. Not garbage exactly, but an endless stream of everything. Opinions that aren't yours, desires manufactured in boardrooms, fears packaged as news, hopes sold as products. Drop by drop, the lake becomes cloudy, the reflection grows murky, and eventually, you can't see the bottom anymore. This is what I call the great drowning, not a flood that comes all at once. I remember my grandmother's kitchen. It was a small room with a window overlooking her garden. When I asked her once what she was thinking about during those quiet moments, she smiled at capacity to be present without agenda, to observe without immediately forming opinions, to exist without constantly consuming has become as rare as a quiet night in a city. The goldfish bowl experiment. There is a story about a goldfish who lived in a bowl so small, it could swim its entire perimeter in seconds. Scientists have studied this phenomenon. We've become that goldfish. Our minds, once capable of spanning universes, now swim in circles no bigger than our last scroll through social media. But here's what's tragic. The bowl isn't even real anymore. I spent a day once counting how many times I reached for my phone. Each reach was a small surrender, a tiny admission that I had forgotten how to be alone with my own thoughts. The appetite that ate itself. I met a man once who told me he was hungry all the time. Not for food, he ate plenty. I know so much, he said, scrolling through his phone while we talked. I'm constantly learning. But when I asked him what he had learned that day, he couldn't remember. This is the paradox of our age. We've never had access to more knowledge, yet we've never been more ignorant of ourselves. The man's hunger was real, but he had misidentified what he was hungry for. But depth requires time. The speed of thought versus the speed of understanding. There's a difference between the speed of thought and the speed of understanding. Understanding requires what the Japanese call the pregnant pause, the space between notes that makes music possible. I watch people scrolling through their feeds, their eyes moving faster than their minds can process, their fingers swiping before their hearts can feel. Act 2. The architecture of emptiness. The dealers of attention. Let me tell you about the most successful drug dealers in history. The drug is instant gratification. The dealers are the algorithms that have learned to tap directly into your brain's reward system, delivering hits of dopamine so precisely calibrated that your natural capacity for patience, for sitting with discomfort, for allowing thoughts to mature atrophies like an unused muscle. They know exactly when you're most vulnerable, when your defenses are down, when you're most likely to reach for your phone. They know that you're more susceptible to distraction when you're tired, more likely to seek validation when you're lonely, more prone to mindless scrolling when you're anxious. These dealers have studied you more thoroughly than you've studied yourself. They know how to make you feel simultaneously connected and alone, informed and confused, empowered and helpless. They've mapped your psychological territory better than any therapist. Not to heal you, but to exploit you. And the most insidious part, they've convinced you that this is freedom, that having infinite choices means you're free, when really, you're just choosing from a menu someone else wrote. One mirror shows you as more successful, another as more attractive, another as more loved. None of them show you as you actually are. The more she consumed, the thirstier she became. I knew a woman who spent 3 hours every evening on social media. She called it staying connected. We've become so skilled at presenting ourselves that we've forgotten who we are when no one is watching. But when I asked her about her actual connections, her relationships, her friendships, her sense of community, she admitted she felt more isolated than ever. Every photo was carefully composed, every caption thoughtfully crafted, every story strategically timed. She gained thousands of followers, received hundreds of likes, and felt completely empty. I know what everyone's having for dinner, she said, but I can't remember the last time I had a real conversation with another human being. She was consuming connection without experiencing it, like drinking salt water to quench thirst. In silence, you can't be sold anything. In silence, you can't be influenced or manipulated. In silence, You might discover that most of what you think you want was never really yours to begin with. She could curate her image but couldn't contact her essence, filled with the kind of mental static that makes it impossible to hear your own thoughts. They spoke of insights that rose spontaneously, of emotions they hadn't felt in years, of a sense of coming home to themselves. Because if you could hear them clearly, you might realize that most of them aren't yours at all. No phones, no music, no distractions, just silence. Every notification arrives with the implicit message that it requires immediate attention. Every news story is breaking. Every update is critical. Every message demands an instant response. They had become so unaccustomed to their own company that silence felt like a threat. I discovered that everything truly important was still there a week later. But the artificial anxiety that came from constant updates had disappeared. I had been treating the trivial as urgent and the urgent as trivial. Within 3 minutes, most of them were visibly uncomfortable. Some started fidgeting. Others began looking around frantically. A few actually left the room. Manufactured urgency has the fleeting intensity of sugar, a brief rush followed by a crash, leaving you hungrier than before. The vast majority of things that feel urgent are manufactured. Emergencies designed to capture and hold your attention. They raise psychological tricks that exploit your natural survival instincts to keep you engaged with systems that profit from your distraction. They can't be addressed in the gaps between notifications. They require the deep attention that manufactured urgency is designed to prevent. She had optimized her external presentation while her internal world withered from neglect. The house of mirrors. Imagine walking into a house of mirrors, but instead of reflecting your physical form, each mirror shows you a different version of who you could be. And once you realize that, you might start to wonder, what would your thoughts sound like if they were actually yours? We spend so much time trying to become someone else's idea of who we are that we forget to discover who we actually are. This is what our digital world has become, a house of mirrors where we can no longer distinguish between our authentic self and the countless versions we retold we should be. The tragedy isn't that we're lost. The tragedy is that we're so busy looking at reflections that we've forgotten we're the one doing the looking. Social media has turned us all into performance artists, constantly crafting and curating versions of ourselves for public consumption. I have a friend who spent months perfecting her Instagram presence. I don't know who I am anymore. She told me one day, I only know who I appear to be. She had become a master of performance and a stranger to herself. The silence they fear. There's a reason why silence has become the most radical act in our society. This is why our world is designed to be noisy, not just loud noisy. They're borrowed, inherited, implanted. I conducted an experiment once. I asked a group of people to sit in complete silence for just 10 minutes. When I asked them afterward what they had experienced, they described anxiety, restlessness, and an overwhelming urge to do something, anything to fill the void. But the few who stayed, who pushed through the initial discomfort, described something different. Silence isn't empty, it's full of everything that noise drowns out. The manufactured urgency, everything in our world is designed to feel urgent. But here's the truth, almost nothing is actually urgent. Real urgency is rare. Real urgency is your child crying, your house on fire, your loved one in danger. Real urgency has weight and substance. I stopped checking news multiple times a day and started checking it once a week. The most important questions of life: who am I? What do I value? How do I want to live? These questions require time and space to answer. Act 3. The archaeology of the self, digging through the layers. Consciousness is like an archaeological site. The deepest layers contain the most authentic parts of yourself, your genuine curiosities, your real fears, your original dreams. But these layers are buried under sediment accumulated over years of being told who you should be. You have to brush away the debris of other people's expectations, the dust of borrowed beliefs, the accumulated weight of should-haves and supposed-tos. It is delicate work because sometimes you've held on to these foreign objects for so long that you've forgotten they were not actually part of you. The work of awakening is like careful excavation. But when you finally reach those deeper layers, when you uncover something that is genuinely, Authentically yours, even if it's just a small shard of curiosity about why leaves change color. You understand what all this digging was for. I remember the moment I realized that my career ambitions weren't actually mine. I had been pursuing a path that looked successful from the outside, that impressed other people. That seemed like what I should want. But sitting in my office one day, surrounded by the trappings of achievement, I felt completely hollow. The excavation began with a simple question. What would I do if no one was watching? The feeling was so foreign that I almost didn't recognize it as mine. I had become so accustomed to feeling what I was supposed to feel. That authentic emotion felt like a stranger. We know how to express outrage on social media, but we've lost touch with the quiet burn of righteous anger. We know how to display love through gifts and gestures, but we've forgotten the vulnerable trembling of actually loving someone. Not what would I do if I didn't need money, or if I weren't afraid of failure. It arises from the mysterious depths of our being and demands to be felt exactly as it is, not as we think it should be. We've become so skilled at performing emotions that we've forgotten how to have them. But what would I do if there was no one to impress, no one to please, no one to validate my choices? But you can't force awakening any more than you can force someone to fall asleep. It's something that happens from the inside out, not the outside in. As I learned to be authentic myself, I began to attract others who were also questioning, also seeking, also willing to step outside the script. Real community began to form around shared commitment to consciousness. Rather than shared participation in unconsciousness, we've been taught to avoid difficult emotions, to medicate discomfort, to solve problems rather than experience them. But consciousness requires the courage to feel everything that arises, even when it's uncomfortable. Conversations that once engaged me felt hollow. Activities that once excited me felt pointless. Relationships that once satisfied me felt superficial. The answer surprised me. I would write. I would teach. I would spend time in nature. I would have long conversations with interesting people. I would read books that challenged me, not because you're alone, but because you realize how asleep everyone else is. You start to see the scripts everyone is reading from, the roles everyone is playing, the ways everyone has forgotten they're playing them. I would create things that matter to me, even if they matter to no one else. None of these things were particularly impressive by conventional standards, but they felt like coming home to myself after a long journey of being someone else. The weight of authentic feeling. It's the price of authentic living, and it's worth every moment of discomfort it brings. I remember the first time I felt something that was completely my own. I was walking through a cemetery at dusk, not thinking about death or life or anything profound. I wasn't rejecting people. I was rejecting the roles we were all playing. I was just walking, and suddenly, I felt this overwhelming gratitude for the simple fact that I could feel gratitude, not for anything specific, just for the capacity itself. It was like discovering a new color or hearing a new note in music. This is what we've lost, the weight of genuine feeling. We know how to look happy in photos, but we've forgotten what happiness feels like in our bodies. Authentic feeling is uncomfortable because it's unpredictable. It doesn't follow scripts or meet expectations. The loneliness of waking up. Here's something no one tells you about consciousness. It's lonely. You want to shake people awake, to show them what you've discovered. This loneliness isn't something to overcome, it's something to honor. I went through a period where I felt like I was living in a different world from everyone around me. I thought I was becoming antisocial, but I was actually becoming more social, more interested in real connection rather than social performance. The loneliness was real, but it was also temporary. The courage to feel everything. Part of the work of awakening is learning to feel everything without drowning in it. This doesn't mean wallowing in negative emotions or celebrating suffering. It means developing the capacity to be present with whatever is true in this moment, without immediately trying to fix it, or change it or escape from it. I learned this lesson during a period of profound grief. I had lost someone important to me, and the pain was unbearable. My instinct was to find ways to make it hurt less, to distract myself, to numb the feeling. to rush toward acceptance. But a wise friend told me something that changed everything. The goal isn't to feel better. The goal is to feel everything. So I sat with the grief. I let it move through me like weather, intense and overwhelming at times, gentle and melancholy at others. I stopped trying to fix it or rush it or make it more manageable. I just felt it, and something extraordinary happened. The grief began to transform, not into happiness that would have been spiritual bypassing, but into something deeper. It became a teacher rather than an enemy, into appreciation for the love that had made the loss possible, into gratitude for the capacity to feel so deeply. I would live with the questions, let them work on me, notice how they evolved and deepened over time, into a profound sense of connection with all beings who have ever loved and lost. A few opened up entire territories of inquiry that I'm still exploring years later. The pain didn't disappear, but it became meaningful. It became a doorway into deeper compassion, both for myself and for others. It taught me that uncertainty is not a problem to be solved, but a creative space to be explored. When you feel the urge to have an opinion, wait until you understand what you're having an opinion about. When you want to react to something, pause long enough to ask yourself what you're really reacting to. We become passive consumers of experience rather than active participants in our own lives. Slow thinking is like a meal you prepare yourself, savoring each ingredient, understanding how flavors combine, nourishing yourself at a cellular level. I discovered that I had been living in a kind of mental fog, never fully present to any single experience. Everyone must be special, unique, destined for greatness. But this pressure to be extraordinary often prevents us from being genuinely human. In discovering that a perfectly ordinary life, lived with full awareness, is more extraordinary than any performed version of specialness, I had been skimming the surface of life. Instead of diving deep, it requires the patience to do this thousands of times without getting frustrated or giving up. I wanted to leave a mark on the world that would prove I had been here. But all this striving for extraordinariness made me feel hollow and desperate. I found joy in daily routines instead of seeking constant novelty. Not because I was having more spectacular experiences, but because I was having more complete experiences. I was finally living my life instead of performing it. I was so focused on being impressive that I had forgotten how to be authentic. I was so concerned with being memorable that I had forgotten how to be present. A child can experience the same quality of wonder looking at a puddle as a scientist can studying the cosmos. Wonder doesn't discriminate. I would choose something I saw every day: a tree outside my window, the pattern of cracks in the sidewalk, the way light moved across my wall, and I would look at it as if I had never seen it before. It requires you to look at familiar things with fresh eyes, to approach the world with what Zen Buddhism calls beginner's mind. 15 minutes of looking at a single object: a flower, a candle, a stone, without thinking about it. Act 4. The practice of being human, the art of slow thinking. In a world obsessed with speed, thinking slowly has become a revolutionary act. I wasn't experiencing anything different, I was experiencing everything differently. Slow thinking means allowing ideas to mature like wine, letting questions ripen until they're ready to be asked, sitting with uncertainty long enough to discover what it has to teach you. Fast thinking is like fast food: it fills you up quickly, but leaves you hungry an hour later. The practice is simple but difficult. When you have a question, sit with it for a week before seeking an answer. I started carrying a notebook where I would write down questions as they occurred to me, but I wouldn't allow myself to look up the answers immediately. Some questions resolved themselves without any external input. Others led to new questions that were more interesting than the original ones. The practice taught me that the quality of my questions was more important than the speed of my answers. The discipline of attention is the foundation of consciousness. Without the ability to direct and sustain attention, we're at the mercy of whatever is loudest, brightest, or most insistent. Developing attention requires practice, like developing any skill. It requires the willingness to notice when your mind wanders and gently bring it back to your chosen focus. I began with simple exercises: 5 minutes of watching my breath, 10 minutes of listening to sounds without identifying them. These exercises might sound boring, but they were revelatory. As my attention strengthened, everything became more vivid. Colors seemed brighter. Flavors became more complex. Conversations became more meaningful. The courage to be ordinary. We live in a culture that has made the extraordinary seem mandatory. There's profound courage in being ordinary, in finding magic in mundane moments. The courage to be ordinary is the courage to be yourself without apology, to find contentment in simple pleasures, to realize that you don't need to be anyone other than who you are. I spent years trying to be exceptional. I wanted to be recognized, celebrated, remembered. The turning point came when I realized that trying to be special was preventing me from being real. I began to practice being ordinary. I savored simple meals instead of photographing them. I enjoyed quiet conversations instead of collecting profound quotes. And something surprising happened. Life became more beautiful, not less. The democracy of wonder is the most democratic. Emotion, it's available to everyone, regardless of education, wealth, or status. But wonder requires presence. It requires you to stop trying to get somewhere and start being where you are. When was the last time you felt genuine wonder? Not manufactured amazement at some spectacle designed to impress you, but quiet, authentic wonder at something simple and real. I rediscovered wonder through a practice I call first-time seeing. This practice revealed how much of life I had been missing by assuming I already knew what I was seeing. When I looked at the tree with fresh eyes, I noticed the incredible complexity of its bark, the way its leaves moved in patterns I had never observed, the subtle changes that marked the passage of seasons. It requires the humility to admit that you don't know everything, that there's always more to discover, that the world is far more mysterious and beautiful than your assumptions allow. Wonder is always available, but it requires the willingness to slow down and pay attention. Solitude is a gift, the presence of yourself. The practice of solitude is different from loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of being alone. Solitude is the joy of being alone. Loneliness is a deficit, the absence of connection. Just me and the world, moving at the pace of reflection rather than the pace of efficiency. We're constantly available, constantly stimulated, constantly in contact with others. We've forgotten how to be alone without feeling lonely. I would walk until my mind stopped racing, until my body relaxed, until I remembered who I was beneath all the roles I played. In our hyper-connected world, solitude has become almost impossible. It's a network of people who have decided to reclaim their minds, to think their own thoughts, to feel their own feelings. They're the ones who pause before reacting, who ask questions that make others uncomfortable, who choose silence over noise. And in doing so, they become beacons for others who are still lost in the fog of collective unconsciousness. They're the ones who read books instead of headlines, who have conversations instead of exchanges, who create instead of consume. And that decision, that simple commitment to presence, creates ripples that extend far beyond their immediate circle. They were more personal, more integrated, more true to my actual experience rather than my theoretical understanding. It's like seeing a light in a dark room. You don't need to understand electricity to know that someone has found the switch. But solitude is essential for consciousness. It's in solitude that we discover who we are when we're not performing for others. It's in solitude that we hear the quiet voice of our own wisdom. It's in solitude that we remember what we actually care about. And that modeling gave others permission to be more authentic themselves. Every moment of genuine awareness creates ripples that extend far beyond your immediate experience. Every time you choose presence over distraction, authenticity over performance, you're contributing to a collective awakening that's happening whether we notice it or not. It's the difference between being a passenger in your own life and being the driver, the stranger on the bus who smiles without wanting anything in return. It's the work of a lifetime, and it's the only work that ultimately matters. I started taking what I called solitude walks, long walks with no destination, no phone, no agenda. These walks became a form of meditation, a way of processing the experiences of daily life without the immediate need to share them or make them productive. There are others on this path, others who are asking the same questions, facing the same challenges, discovering the same truths. The insights that came during these walks were different from the insights that came from reading or discussing ideas with others. Act 5. The underground railroad of consciousness, the secret network. The quality of interaction in my circles began to shift in subtle but profound ways. It requires the wisdom to know when to seek guidance and when to trust your own inner knowing. There's an underground railroad operating right now, and you might be part of it without even knowing it. They don't know that flowers are supposed to be background decoration. We develop what T.S. Eliot called the boredom, the horror, and the glory of adult life, the tendency to see everything as either boring because we think we know what it is, horrible because it doesn't meet our expectations, or glorious because it serves our purposes. So they stop and stare at them with complete attention. They don't know that clouds are just weather, so they see dragons and castles and infinite possibilities. These people don't wear special badges or hold meetings. We don't always agree on everything, but we share a commitment to consciousness, to growth, to the hard work of becoming fully human. It's possible to see the world with fresh eyes, to approach each moment as if it were the first time, to rediscover the magic that's always been there but that we've stopped noticing. They're not trying to change the world. They're trying to change themselves. I've met these people in unexpected places. The barista who makes eye contact and asks how you're really doing. The colleague who listens without immediately offering solutions. They're not perfect. They're not enlightened. They're just people who have decided to show up fully to their own lives. The ripple effect consciousness is contagious. When you encounter someone who is genuinely awake, present, authentic, thinking their own thoughts, something in you recognizes it. This is why the work of awakening is never just personal. I watched this happen in my own community. As I became more present and authentic, others began to respond differently. Conversations became deeper. Relationships became more honest. It wasn't that I was trying to change anyone else. I was simply modeling a different way of being. The long game, the transformation of consciousness, isn't something that happens overnight. It's not a destination you reach, but a direction you choose. This is the long game, not the quick fix or the instant solution, but the slow, patient work of becoming who you actually are. The long game requires faith, not religious faith, but the faith that growth is possible, that consciousness can be cultivated, that small changes in awareness can lead to profound changes in experience. It requires patience, the patience to keep practicing even when you don't see immediate results, to keep questioning even when answers don't come quickly, to keep growing even when growth is uncomfortable. And it requires love for yourself as you are right now, love for the process of becoming, love for the mystery of consciousness itself. The community of seekers, while the journey of awakening is ultimately individual, it doesn't have to be solitary. Finding your community of seekers requires discernment. It requires the ability to distinguish between those who are genuinely committed to growth and those who are just performing spirituality. But when you find your people, those who are willing to be vulnerable, to question everything, to support each other as growth without trying to control it, the journey becomes not just more bearable, but more joyful. I found my community gradually through books and conversations, through shared experiences and common values. This community has become a source of strength and inspiration, a reminder that I'm not alone in this work, that there are others who are also choosing awareness over numbness, depth over surface, truth over comfort. Act 6. The return to wonder, remembering how to see. Children see everything for the first time. They don't have categories and assumptions that filter their experience. Somewhere along the way, we lose this capacity for fresh seeing. But it's possible to return to wonder. This requires what I call the practice of not knowing. The willingness to approach familiar experiences with curiosity rather than assumption, to ask questions rather than make statements, to be surprised by what you discover. The sacred in the ordinary, one of the most profound discoveries on the path of awakening, is that the sacred isn't separate from the ordinary. It is hidden within it. The divine isn't somewhere else. It's right here, disguised as your daily life. This doesn't require any special beliefs or religious framework. It simply requires the willingness to pay attention, to look closely, to be present to what's actually happening rather than what you think should be happening. That one evening, I decided to pay attention to the experience itself. I discovered this while washing dishes. It was a mundane task I had always considered a chore, something to get through as quickly as possible. I noticed the temperature of the water, the texture of the soap, the way the light reflected off the bubbles. I noticed the rhythm of my movements, the satisfaction of transforming something dirty into something clean, a doorway into appreciation for the incredible ordinary miracles that surround us every moment. I noticed the simple miracle of having clean water, dishes to eat from, food to sustain my body. Instead, I wrote about tiny moments of goodness, the way morning light fell across my desk, the taste of the first sip of coffee, the feeling of clean sheets against my skin. I became more resilient in the face of difficulties because I had developed the capacity to notice what remained good even in challenging circumstances. It has to be specific, particular, grounded in real experience rather than general platitudes. This doesn't mean becoming morbid or obsessed with death. It means recognizing the impermanence of everything, including yourself, and allowing this recognition to transform how you live. What had seemed like drudgery revealed itself as a meditation, a practice of presence. It's the recognition that even in the midst of difficulty, there is always something to appreciate, something to be thankful for. You become less focused on getting and more focused on giving. You become less attached to outcomes and more present to experiences. The practice of gratitude consciousness can't be forced any more than a flower can be forced to bloom. It happens in its own time, in its own way. Gratitude is more than a feeling, it's a practice, a way of orienting yourself toward life. What if you trusted your own experience more than other people's opinions? What if you allowed yourself to wonder, to question, to feel everything that arises? I imagine myself at the end of my life, looking back on this moment, and I ask myself, what would matter to me then? Are you willing to be responsible for your own awareness? What would I regret not having done? What would I be grateful for? But gratitude can't be forced or fabricated. It has to arise from genuine recognition of what's actually good in your life. I started keeping a gratitude journal, but not the kind that focuses on big, obvious things. This practice trained my attention to notice what was working rather than what was wrong, what was present rather than what was missing, what was beautiful rather than what was broken. Not tomorrow, not when you're ready, not when conditions are perfect. Right now, in this moment, with this breath. Over time, this shift in attention transformed my entire relationship with life. The art of dying before you die. There's an ancient practice found in many wisdom traditions. Learning to die before you die. When you truly understand that your time is limited, that everything you're attached to will eventually pass away, that even your most cherished possessions and relationships are temporary, something shifts in your priorities. You become less concerned with accumulating and more concerned with appreciating. I practice this through what I call death meditation, not dwelling on morbid thoughts, but contemplating the reality of impermanence. This practice has helped me distinguish between what's truly important and what's merely urgent, between what serves my authentic self and what serves my ego, between what contributes to my growth and what contributes to my distraction. Closing, the invitation. The door that's always open as we reach the end of our time together. I want you to know that everything I've shared with you tonight is an invitation, not a mandate. But the door is always open. The possibility of awakening is always available. The invitation is simple. What if you decided to pay attention? What if you chose presence over distraction? The invitation is also challenging. Are you willing to give up the familiar comfort of unconsciousness? Are you willing to feel the discomfort of not knowing? The question that changes everything. I'll leave you with a question not to answer immediately, but to carry with you like a seed that will grow in its own time. What would your life look like if you